There's an area of Doctor Who that's filled with passion and hope that we will finally get to see these Doctor Who stories. It will be the Doctor Who missing episodes. Definitely one of mine, and most people watching, one of their favourite parts about Doctor Who. But at the same time, it is depressing that this is even a topic of discussion, as I consider old television history. So I hope you enjoy my ranking of all the Doctor Who missing episodes, ranked worst to best. Number 19. The Space Pirates. You were expecting the Space Pirates, sir? Well, yeah. Last place belongs to the Space Pirates. Now, I'm not going to do the joke that it's so uninspiring that it belongs to stay missing or we should burn it if it's recovered, which the Space Pirates has always become the tragic victim of being completely rejected and unloved by 99.9% of the fandom. So seeing the Space Pirates last is not surprising to the majority, and the fact that it's bullied relentlessly. Has the Space Pirates become a meme of itself? Well, yeah. I believe its very existence, no pun intended, is to be bullied. And I would say that some people do go at it, even though they haven't experienced the entire story from start to finish. I still found myself disappointed about how painfully dull the story is, and only used as a low-budget, soulless space romp to bridge the gap to make way for the war games. What it suffers in is the space crew. Even though there is quite a lot happening dialogue-wise in the story, the space crew in no way, shape or form interact with the main characters, and to get any form of relationship with these supporting characters is almost impossible. Myro Clancy is the most jarring character in the show's history, even though I believe Loose Cannon did a good job with the recon, which deserves credit, mind you. But the fact the story was written by Robert Holmes might put you in a coma, I don't know. The best interpretation of the Space Pirates is the audio novelization. It's the better interpretation. Sure, it's longer, which sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it's the better version, believe me. It's a space romp about inner corruption in an organisation with space pirates causing acts of sabotage. It almost feels that Dr. Jamie and Zoe didn't even need to be there. Their involvement is almost pointless. You want a better version? I would say give the audio novelization a go, which I would rate above average. This story is jarring at a 3 out of 10. The Space Pirates is weird, because a lot happens in it dialogue-wise and things happening. It's dull at the same time for me, which sounds insane. But yeah, Space Pirates is the worst missing episode. Would I reject it? No. But yeah, last place, it's unsurprisingly the Space Pirates. Number 18. The Wheel in Space. It's been described the Second Doctor era is the golden age of Cyberman stories. Yeah, think again. The Wheel in Space offers a rather convoluted and painfully dull 6-part adventure of characters as dry as sanding paper, and Cybermen arriving in balloons to invade the wheel for some purpose. Yes, the plot sounds rather simple, doesn't it? And for some ungodly reason, The Wheel in Space has one of the most convoluted plots in the entirety of the Second Doctor era. So much it actually doesn't make any sense. Episode 1 relies more on building atmosphere, but compared to other Cyberman stories, I don't think it holds a candle to them. In fact, The Wheel in Space is so far away from the other Cyberman Second Doctor era, they're pretty much in the Andromeda universe. Didn't I mention the Cyberman plot makes no sense? For some reason, only Cybermen are affected by an airlock door opening, considering it would cause catastrophic damage and almost impossible to survive being anywhere near the airlock. But, plot armor, I suppose. To be honest, the more I experience The Wheel in Space, the more I actually dislike it. If I probably watch it again, it will go past the Space Pirates, because the Cybermats are more intimidating than the Cybermen themselves. Yeah, that's not a good look. Yeah, it's a very, very odd Second Doctor story, The Wheel in Space, and it's incredibly convoluted and does have its plot holes. Number 18, The Wheel in Space. Number 17, The Smugglers. Yep, I rated this one a little lower on my First Doctor ranking, but it's gone up a little bit. I think I judged it a bit too harshly, and I think the recon definitely has a reason for that. It's definitely a struggle. But the Smugglers I would call the most forgotten missing episode. Being lost has become its curse, almost. The Smugglers has gone up in rating after experiencing the reconstruction. Yes, you will struggle with it 100%. I've watched much worse. To put the Smugglers last in my ranking felt incorrect. But it is, in my opinion, the most unrememberable Doctor Who story of all time so far when I've done my marathon. The Smugglers animation is likely to be next after the Underwater Menace, so we could get an update. The story ends up in Cornwall in the 17th century, and the TARDIS team get embroiled with smugglers attempting to find lost treasure. It's a story about survival. It's a blend of comedic and quite dark moments, following the formula with the Romans and the Mythmakers. But with the gunfighters killing the pure historical formula, it only goes downhill until the formula is thrown into the bin to make favour of Base Under Siege, which shown its success in the 10th planet. Even though the dynamics between the companions Ben and Polly are great, they ultimately don't fare too well in the story. The Smugglers is heavy on dialogue, slow on pushing the narrative and tempting to go for a light adventure, but also be daring at the same time. The narrative itself just isn't captivating enough to grab me, but we must wait and see until the supposed future animation release really confirms my opinion. Number 16, Galaxy 4. Galaxy 4, with a 4 out of 10, is a story that struggles in many of its aspects. For one, it was supposed to be done much earlier in the original companion team, but with many delays it ended up in Season 3 to be overshadowed by the build-up of the Daleks' master plan. The moral of the message is not judging a book by its cover, as human beings base our assumptions on visually assessing individuals. The Dravins are a matriarchal race who use a militaristic approach and have a rather cruel and corrupt leadership, and even treat their lower ranks with disdain and hardship. Galaxy 4 is a story that has strong themes and messages only to be let down by sloppy execution. A thin and almost non-existent plot at times, a very slow-paced narrative, and on the planet on the brink of destruction with the Rills and the Dravins trapped and the Doctor and the companions stuck in the middle. Margaret, the leader, is ruthless but at times quite wooden in her delivery. You also have the Chumblies, which are frankly adorable. It's a generic story with good themes but fails in its execution. If we had the feeling of tension that the planet was actually exploding, because you never get that feeling. Flipping out, you got it in Inferno, but not here. So I think that becomes one of its biggest detriments. Number 15, The Highlanders. Yeah, we're not talking about under average missing episodes here, so we're done with that now, so no more negativity. The Highlanders. Underrated? Yes, but a story to finally put the historical formula into the bin, but failing to capture an uninterested audience. And Doctor Who, at this point, was having an identity crisis. The second Doctor in The Highlanders was so inconsistent in his first 3 stories, they flip-flopped like a fish out of water. Even though I respect the idea to experiment, it ultimately ended up quite jarring, especially in The Highlanders, compared to Power and Underwater Menace. While the Moonbase did manage to have some stability with the character and make a consistent character within the second Doctor. The Highlanders is the story to introduce Jamie, which is why some people want to have the story back. It's a forgotten relic that's got something special about it, but the story alone doesn't really hold a candle to other missing episodes and other second Doctor Who stories. Even though the story is rather forgettable and doesn't stand out too much, it's got good themes, featuring corruptions of a solicitor named Grey, who is selling slaves to the West Indies but securing them under his own power. The Doctor is cunning and plays the role of smuggling weapons into the Highlands, and Polly actually doing something besides being a damsel by the writing team and using blackmail tactics in an attempt to gather information to help the Doctor. Overall, it's an underrated story I'll be happy to see. Yeah, it's just there, The Highlanders, it's just one of those stories, but I think it's quite good. Underrated. Not brilliant, but it's good. Number 14, The Mythmakers. Not surprising that the Mythmakers is close to the Highlanders in rating, considering they're both underrated stories, completely overshadowed by the Holy Grail Dalek stories. I mean, the poor Mythmakers is practically a sandwich between the Daleks' master plan and its prequel Missions to the Unknown, so no doubt it's underrated. That being said, this is served as a departure for Vicky, who, let's be honest, didn't get the best delivery, and they just slightly wanted to cut her off like a piece of unwanted fat. They treated her with that much respect. They tried to give us something of developing romance, but honestly it was more shoehorned than anything, and just makes way for the producers just to give it the boot. The Mythmakers is pretty much in the same style of the Romans, of delivering a carry-on style script while also utilising very bleak and gravitas narratives, like the Battle of Troy and entering the city with the Trojan horse. The Doctor is careful in his actions to keep history on the same line, and is playing the role of Zeus to curry favour with Odysseus and the Trojans. But this plot sadly doesn't really go anywhere and just ends after episode 1's cliffhanger. The Mythmakers are fun, underrated romp. I just believe the Romans, with the exact same formula mind you, like comedic, pure historical, the Romans, maybe the Smugglers, but that might be a bit of a push, and the Mythmakers are kind of all in the same formula, same type of story, of comedic style of writing, with dark elements in it, but I just think the Romans just does it superior compared to those two stories. But I would definitely like to see it back. It is one underrated story which the Daleks' master plan is to blame for that. Number 13. The Massacre. Yes, pretty much everyone loves this story, mainly for episode 4, let's be real. But let's talk about the whole story. Season 3 offers quite a unique collection of First Doctor stories with varying narratives and themes. The Massacre is just putting more fuel to the fire of what ended with the Daleks' master plan. The Massacre is pretty much a Stephen solo story, Dr. Light, where he is the one who has to solve the various activities within the story, and the Doctor's whereabouts being ambiguous and a mystery. Along with the Mythmakers, we have another romance blossoming here with Stephen, which I admit is a lot better and more authentic and well written, considering the times the story is set in. It's based on survival, so it's so much more better compared to the shoehorned Mythmakers romance story. The Massacre is set in 1572 with religious tensions with the Catholic Queen Mother, Catherine, setting up the plan of massacring the Protestants of France. The Doctor and the Abbot being identical to each other causes a mystery within the story and about the Doctor's actions and whereabouts. Episode 1, 2 and 3 is more character and dialogue driven in its narrative, which might put some people off the reconstruction, but it's definitely not impossible. But episode 4 is without a doubt one of my favourite episodes of the First Doctor era, with the Doctor facing an Aztec situation and history has to play how it happened, otherwise it could create dire consequences. Stephen protests to this. To have the Bell of Doom back, cool, that'd be flipping brilliant, because it's got a speech that could be equal to the Daleks' invasion of Earth, departure of Susan. Those could be equal to each other, and we don't have it. No clip, no episode. We frankly have nothing of the Massacre. Yet the Massacre literally got massacred. Number 12. Mission to the Unknown. The story which we will never likely see in its original form. We have no idea what happened to the tape. Most likely got destroyed, but yeah, we just have to live with it. The only Doctor Who story not to feature the Doctor, and it serves as a setup and prequel to the Daleks' master plan. That's what it is and is intended for. It is the prequel and the setup to the Daleks' master plan. The reason why this story exists is because of the Plan of the Giants. The producers thought it was a slog at 4 parts, so they trimmed and cut the 2 parts and just slapped them together to make it a 3-part story. The YouTube University project of Missions to the Unknown serves as the best representation of the prequel, and I recommend giving it a watch. Number 11. The Abominable Snowmen. The animation release was the second best thing to happen to the Abominable Snowmen, with of course the best thing having it recovered. It suffered from the enemy of the world situation, I believe, and even with the animation out, I still believe it's underrated, which is pretty sad. It's the first story to feature the Great Intelligence and the Yeti. Even though they look like they want to give you a hug, these things would tear your limbs off. Set in Tibet, 1930s, Professor Travis is on the hunt to find the lost abominable snowman and Yeti. The Great Intelligence in this story is beyond frightening, who is in the body of a man who is hundreds of years old and prevents him from dying. That is depressing. Stuck in one room and forced to stay alive. If that isn't torture, I don't know what is. I love the Great Intelligence in the story, so much so, I prefer him here than the Web of Fear. Number 10. The Savages. I've been using the word underrated a fair number of times to describe these stories that I'm missing, which is honestly sad, and I think it more comes down to the fact they're missing, or rotting away in an old TV station, or just looking like an ancient ornament on someone's shelf. The Savages plays an interesting direction of appearing like it's in the past, and a setting much like An Unearthly Child, which is quite a nice reference considering the two stories complement each other with production codes. The Savages is a story set in the far future of a savage-like tribe who live outside the city of the Elders, who are technological masters and have a dark secret of powering their city from functioning. It's a story that has themes of how the elites, the elders, benefit from using these individuals to live in luxury while they just suffer and are barely alive. Pretty much like how politicians piss off the working class. The departure of Stephen happens here, and in my opinion, it's one underrated Doctor Who story. I think, along with the Crusades, I would say it's the most underrated First Doctor story of all time. Love to see it back. Number 9. The Faceless Ones. The Faceless Ones is an early prototype story of what is to come in the Earthbound Third Doctor stories following the Macra Terror. This formula of Earthbound stories became a massive hit in Season 5 and continued in the Pertwee era. The Faceless Ones is easily enjoyable Earthbound mystery story of aliens, the chameleons disguised as humans by stealing people and vanishing them without a trace on their flights by chameleon tours. The chameleons are stealing people, and the Doctor and the companions are tasked to solve the vanishing planes. The Faceless Ones put a lot of pressure on the Doctor to succeed. The chameleons make quick work of dealing with Polly and Ben, and using a chameleon disguised as Polly to hinder the Doctor's investigation. Jamie strikes a romance with a character named Samantha, and flows at a brilliant pace for a 6-parter. The only thing I don't like about the story is its conclusion. It sucks. It basically ends by the chameleons going, "Yo, shit, my bad, we're just gonna leave now." Yeah, it's pretty bad in my opinion how it ends, and it's definitely not how I would do it. It is a really good, easy to watch 6-part story, and the animation's pretty good too. Number 8. The Celestial Toymaker. Now this story is certainly going to get some intrigue now. The Celestial Toymaker, not everyone likes it, and there's reasons to it, but the Celestial Toymaker is a story that I've always found fascinating, mainly because of the villain, the Toymaker. The Toymaker uses psychological and environmental manipulation to break the will of a character's mind by trickery, deception, and games. The Toymaker always tries to bend the game, and against the players, well, victims really, and if they lose, they are stuck for all an eternity and turned into a puppet. I mean, look how depressed this clown looks. Like, it looks like he has no reason to live. And I'm not even joking here, because all the Toymaker's victims are doomed for eternity playing games. But I'm not gonna lie, in some parts, especially episode 3, I for the life of me struggle to comprehend the scenes of how they play out. It's too visual, so I had to drop the rating slightly because I sometimes do struggle. Maybe it gets a 9 when the real thing is found. Or animated, even though it would be quite difficult to animate. You know when I said Clancy was the most jarring character? Scratch that. It's this guy. This guy is. He will hurt your brain. So much that you will exhale brain cells. Because they want to escape with the fact that this character is now in your head. Number 7. The Crusade. Episode 1 is almost a perfect setup for a historical story, perhaps my favourite out of every pure historical. The fighting sequence and thrown into a battle, excellent villains like El Khair, set in the 12th century Palestine during the reign of the Crusaders. It's a story of religious tension, drama, and involved in the high courts of politics and persuasion of the Dr. Ian and Vicky attempting to convince King Richard to use a party of men to help save Barbara, who's become a captive of the opposing side, who killed King Richard's friends. For a number of years I've always struggled, but this seems to have aged like a fine wine for me in The Crusade, criminally underrated. And I started to like it more over time. Yes, the recon can be a struggle, and I think an animation with this would be perfect. I believe it's one of the most overshadowed pure historicals in the entire era. Episode 2 and 4 are missing, episode 1 and 3 we have. One underrated story. Number 6. Marco Polo. Marco Polo is so special that it's practically worshipped. It's famous for being the earliest piece of television not to exist in Doctor Who. Pretty sad fact, but yeah, that's true. And we have nothing. Not a single damn clip. It's also interesting it was sent to multiple countries, but we have no roadmaps to the real thing. Even though an animation would blow up the entire fandom, let alone an episode or two returning, both those statements that's basically hope, I have to admit. Marco Polo features after the TARDIS team have come to some form of respectful relationship during the beginning 3 stories, when the characters went through pretty tense conflicts and fighting. Marco Polo is a journey and an adventure through Asia, with Marco Polo on his expedition with the hopes of returning to Venice, and with the ruthless man Tigana who says he is an emissary of Nogai, but has ulterior motives of killing the great Kublai Khan and serves Nogai and doesn't want to perform a peace negotiation. The story is filled with suspense and drama, with the Doctor trying to win the TARDIS from Marco, Tigana plotting his plan and using Marco to go against the TARDIS team, and then the Doctor and the TARDIS team almost on the brink of death in a bleak desert, which to me is one of the most bleakest cliffhangers of the first Doctor era, and a wonderful cast of characters. Maybe one day we will get this story. I mean, it's freaking worshipped, as I said, Marco Polo. We all want it. Number 5. The Macra Terror. This story is so underrated it's criminal. In fact, you should go to jail if you don't like the Macra Terror. Jokes aside, this might be the most underrated second Doctor story of all time, focusing on totalitarian state of a colony ran on lies, and the Macra using people as slaves to keep the disgusting crabs the Macra alive. It's a 1984 dystopian setting, but done in Doctor Who, and done pretty well, I might add. Jamie might be a little to nothing considering he was shoehorned as a companion last minute, so he doesn't get a lot to do. Ben becomes a slave to the system, and it's a battle for freedom, as anyone who resists the program is re-educated or killed. The Macra, yeah, they look garbage, we know this from a clip. And the animation perhaps isn't realistic delivery to the actual crabs, the Macra, and maybe the original film would look incredibly tacky and execution could be its downfall. As I said before, this story does work in audio format. I still like it, its themes are incredible. The Macra Terror. Number 4. Evil of the Daleks. No pun intended here, but the Daleks are straight up evil in Evil the Daleks. How they treat human beings and break them mentally by their persistence on orders and obeying them is portrayed the best out of any Dalek story in my opinion. Victoria Waterfield's father, Edward, you can see how broken the man is, and that's by the Daleks' relentless orders to break him down, and I think that's what Evil does the best. It even rivals Power of the Daleks in that aspect, but I think only Power bleats it very slightly. Evil of the Daleks has been criticised for its padding in the middle parts, which I would say is true. One episode is Jamie literally wandering in a mansion and that's it. The Daleks' plot of using the Dalek factor and the human factor to create a race of super Daleks makes them even more dangerous than they already are. That's a good plot, but in comparison to Power, I believe Power is the superior Dalek story. However, the story nails in many of its aspects, minus the padding and pacing that suffers. Excellent supporting characters. Victoria Waterfield is in a terrible position with the Daleks and a captive, and the reveal of the Emperor Dalek is amazing. Considering some people find it overrated, which mainly comes down to its padding being the main criticism, I think Evil the Daleks is one of the best Dalek stories of all time in regards to the Daleks themselves and their fear factor. Number 3. Fury from the Deep. This story is the pinnacle of Doctor Who doing Base Under Siege and suspense right. So much so, it's one of the few Doctor Who missing episodes that complements the audio format. simply brings the atmosphere alive to insane levels. The heartbeat sound of the parasitic alien seaweed, how they control people is simply terrifying, and inside the complex, simply eerie, and Fear Within the Deep just nails this. It might also have one of the darkest cliffhangers in the entire show with a fate of a certain character. That cliffhanger will take you back. If it doesn't, then I don't know what will. Even though the monsters are just really seaweed, they are effective. They remind me of the Crinoid in many ways. The characters here are very authentic and realistic, and some of the best acting, even though we don't have the visuals, I've ever experienced. Even though the resolution in parts I don't care for, it has a good departure for Victoria. So some parts in episode 6, I wish they didn't take that direction, but atmosphere wise it could be the best, along with the Web of Fear. Number 2. The Daleks' Master Plan. The mother of all Hartnells, as they call it, and from my observation might be the most wanted Doctor Who story to return, along with Marco Polo. The Daleks' Master Plan is a 12-part epic Dalek adventure with Kevin Stoney playing Marvick Chen, a story about political corruption, power-hungry elites, and the deception of conquering the universe, but a relationship and alliance forged here are out of self-entitled reasons, and are simply using each other. The first half is pretty much perfection. Though I do admit, I'm not even talking about the Christmas special episode here, the second half it does struggle in padding. Yes, the Mother of All Hartnells isn't a perfect Hartnell adventure. In fact, I don't consider any First Doctor story perfect 10 out of 10 besides the Aztecs. But it's more harder for Daleks' Master Plan to be labelled perfect because it's a longer episode. There's more to judge. But wow, what an ending. The brink of destruction. That episode, wow. And I also think episode 2 of the Daleks' Master Plan, The Day of Armageddon, is probably my favourite episode in the William Hartnell First Doctor era of all time, period. And at number 1. Is it really a surprise? You already knew it anyway. It's Power the Daleks. Power the Daleks is my favourite missing episode story. Favourite Dalek story, and 100%. Most likely in my top 5 favourite stories of all time. It's the pinnacle and height of representing the Daleks at their best in terms of creepy factor, manipulation, deception. They got it all, the Daleks. Though they are taking a unconventional direction of being intimidating and downright terrifying, because they're not just simply exterminating here. In fact, that happens pretty much right at the end of Power of the Daleks. As I stated, they use manipulation and deception. Just to see the methods they use and their sly referencing to taking over the colony is just superb. How they make Lesterson go completely insane, a man who just wanted to see the progression of Vulcan and the colony, just to go completely haywire and out of his control, and he blames it on himself, is powerful writing. And as well with the plot with Vulcan and the inner corruption by dealing and killing the real Earth Examiner, with the Doctor then posing as the Earth Examiner who was killed, has a story of inner corruption within the colony of Vulcan and the resistance to replace its power. The supporting characters beyond fantastic. And as I've said a million times in the past, it is my favourite Dalek story, and perhaps it really needs to be reviewed by me to really explain of why this is the best Dalek story of all time. But that isn't really the end of the missing episodes, because we've got others as well. These 7 stories in the missing episodes are more of an anomaly. People tend to forget them, and that these episodes are part of Doctor Who 60 stories where the majority of the episodes exist and it's been released in the DVD and Blu-ray format, being The Reign of Terror, The 10th Planet, Underwater Menace, The Moonbase, The Ice Warriors, The Web of Fear, and the invasion. The Reign of Terror for me, episode 4 and 5, to get back in the archives, is something which you never really hear mentioned. And would people prefer something over the Reign of Terror episode 4 and 5? Yes, but would we refuse it? Hell no. But talking about the Reign of Terror, it's not a story I've always particularly defended. In fact, I think it's one of the weakest episodes out of season 1. Is it bad? No, because I rated it a 6 out of 10. It's just above average. The 10th Planet episode 4, that is probably one of the most important episodes which we don't have, and most likely someone is probably hoarding the episode, considering what happened to it with Blue Peter. The 10th Planet was important for a number of reasons. It was the first one to introduce the Basement to Siege formula, which works wonders, of course, in the Second Doctor era. Even though we have the clip of the regeneration, it's still important to have the actual full film itself. Now with the Second Doctor, The Underwater Menace, which received the most pointless DVD release of all time in 2015, and is finally getting the treatment it deserves. Episode 1 and 3 are in fact missing, and even though it's not a popular episode in terms of budget and production, I consider it very B-movie like. The Moonbase, however, episode 1 and 3, yet again, which are missing, I will be over the moon with. With the Moonbase, I consider it the best representation of the Cybermen, and to get recovered back in the archives, I put the Moonbase 1 and 3 quite high up. Then we have the Ice Warriors, which episode 2 and 3 we do not have. But the Ice Warriors has always been a little bit like the Reign of Terror for me. It's never personally stuck out for me. And I don't think the animation is the best either. Then we have the Web of Fear, which is episode 3, which is the introduction, first appearance of Lethbridge Stewart. I think it would have been even worse if episode 4 was taken except for episode 3, as episode 4 has the best moments in the Web of Fear with the Unit and Yeti confrontation and fight sequences. So I consider episode 4 just as important. And then last, but certainly not least, is the invasion with episode 1 and 4. Personally, I would be head over heels for episode 4 because it has some very good sequences, like the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe escaping international electronics with a helicopter scene. That would have been cool to see. Now, one of my top 5 episodes to see back. Most important, these are single episodes here. For me, the Daleks Master Plan episode 12, because of the shock factor of it. It is one of the most darkest moments in the show's history. Then the Massacre follows on from that with the Massacre episode 4, The Bell of Doom, which has one of the most important speeches to foreshadow the Doctor's character of being isolated and alone. It is such a powerful speech. I believe it is equal to the Daleks' Invasion of Earth speech, saying goodbye to Susan. And the 10th Planet episode 4, those 3 William Hartnell episodes are my most wanted. I want to see back, but to be number 1, it would have to be the Massacre episode 4. And what about the Second Doctor era? Power of the Daleks episode 1, that is just an essential episode to get back. It is also one of the most unlikeliest one, let's be honest here. It is the introduction to Patrick Troughton as the role, and it was very controversial back at this time. Even though I don't think it's the best episode from Power of the Daleks, it just gets better and better and better as it carries on. But since it's the first, the introduction of the Second Doctor, the first time the concept of regeneration has been used, I think it is a staple in Doctor Who, which we do not have. The next would be, generally, believe it or not, the missing episodes, both 1 and 3, of the Moonbase. As I said, the Moonbase is the best depiction of the Cybermen in my opinion. Then it would be quite of an oddball one, this is Fury from the Deep episode 4, because it has one of the most darkest moments, shock factor I have ever experienced in a Doctor Who episode ever. Just bone chilling It is absolute bone chilling. Not going to spoil it. And then lastly is The Invasion episode 4. But my most wanted single episode to come back is Power of the Daleks episode 1 from the second Doctor era. So let's put both of them together. The Massacre episode 4, The Bell of Doom, or Power of the Daleks episode 1. I want to see back the most. Well, it would be Power of the Daleks episode 1, of course. But I believe The Massacre is a truly underrated piece of television. And The Massacre episode 4, The Bell of Doom, plays a very big moment in the first Doctor era, and to foreshadow the Doctor's character. So, that was my video, ranking, overview, whatever you want to call it, of the Doctor Who missing episodes. Hopefully, this isn't the end of the missing episodes, and something comes back.